Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Historia Politica Publica. This is the fourth episode of the series about Alan Moore and his works and the third episode in a row about Watchmen. In the last episode I analyzed the comedian and I spoke about some of his political ideas, also about the different approach that Alan Moore takes with his characters, some analogies with the Battle of Algiers and also the Back to the Future movie. And in this one I wanted to continue with other characters which I think are fundamental to the story, which are Dr. Manhattan and Adrian Bate. First of all, I will talk about Dr. Manhattan, who he's a figure which suffered radiation and now is like a kind of a superhero with powers to go across time and space, kill entire populations, and I will explain why this happened and his importance in the story. Well, it's important to say also that Dr. Manhattan, when he was human, he was called John, so sometimes I will refer him as John during the episode. Dr. Manhattan, or John, he personifies the clock and time during the story. Because when he was a kid, his father bought him a watch, as he was a clockmaker. When John grew up and was working in a nuclear plant, he forgets this watch inside a highly radioactive but secure chamber, because he used to work inside, but apparently there was no threat to him. But when he entered to take the clock back, the door is locked and suddenly there is a lot of radiation in the chamber and he's killed instantly. He disintegrates. There is a ceremony, there is his burial, they go to the graveyard, they mourn him, and after a while, I don't know how long it takes, maybe some weeks or days or even months, I don't remember exactly. But the thing is, like, suddenly when his college and his girlfriend was working with him are in the cafe, like having lunch during the break, Dr. Manhattan appears as a tall, blue, human-like figure. He now can break the barrier of time and space, as I mentioned earlier, use the radiation to destroy entire populations, which makes him incredibly powerful. In a time of atomic bombs, he has become suddenly the deadliest weapon on Earth. He has this transformation, I think is like in the 1960s, if I am not wrong. So, yes, and the world knows instantly about him, obviously, because this is a guy that can change size, can travel very fast, and so on. It is difficult to hide this presence, and obviously the American government uses him as a deterrence in the Cold War. Remember, this is the time after the Second World War when Soviet Union and the United States are the two biggest superpowers, both have atomic bombs, and the sudden appearance of a person like Dr. Manhattan changed the chess. So that is a key moment in the history of Watchmen. So when President Nixon implores him to join the US Army to defeat the Vietnamese people during the Vietnam War, Dr. Manhattan accepts. So the brave defenders of Vietnam, who in real life defeated the Americans in an incredible disadvantaged situations against the mighty superpower, the Vietnamese people were able to defeat the invader. And Ursula K. Le Guin has written a novel which is, I mentioned in another episode, The Word for Word is Forest, in which there is a clear analogy of the Vietnamese people fighting against the United States. But here, with the help of Dr. Manhattan, the Vietnamese people cannot win the war, and basically Vietnam became the 51st state of the United States. At the same time, Nixon, because he has a lot of appeal after winning the war in Vietnam, gets re-elected. And I think he changed the constitution and he is elected during 4 times in a row. And if I am not wrong, in 1985, he's still the president of the United States. He's a very old man by then. But yeah, he has a lot of legitimacy. Obviously, in the story of Watchmen, the Watergate scandal do not happen. I don't know if never happened or because has this kind of power, the media is supporting him, nobody seems to care, but probably he doesn't need really to do this kind of spying his opponents as he did purposely in the real world, because I mean he has won the war, he has all the support, so he doesn't need to undermine democracy anymore, apart from changing the constitution to have him elected for many times and become basically a semi-dictator of the United States. So, the whole world assumes that the United States is, without any doubt, the mightiest power by far, because apart from the atomic bombs, they have Dr. Manhattan, which is the fundamental player in that game. In other words, Dr. Manhattan wins the Cold War in the early 1970s. Or at least everybody seems to believe so. Because later on, he will abandon the Earth in 1985 and will go to Mars, explaining the meaningless of human beings. He thinks that the people are not worthy his efforts. He starts to be pushed by journalists because apparently all the people who have been surrounding Dr. Manhattan in their life has been contaminated by the radiation, and many of them has died by cancer. His first girlfriend has cancer, and also other people, like some co-workers, had died before. So basically he's forced to leave the Earth. Obviously this creates a big alarm within the American government, which basically they say we cannot let the Soviet Union know that a Dr. Manhattan has left. Interestingly, in the real world, like Alan Moore wouldn't be happy with myself saying real world, because for him fiction is as real as the world, but just to make it more simple, the Soviet Union invade Afghanistan in 1979, and the United States was also there, and they have a class in Afghanistan. The United States, they created they armed the Mujahideen that after become Al-Qaeda and so on. So you have here an important part of the story, how both the Soviet Union and the United States destroy Afghanistan, and we have seen the consequences of that for the whole war years later, without speaking about the consequence that they suffer in that time. Another example of imperialism, putting their noses in other parts of the world and destroying everything. The thing is, like in this story, United States never invade Afghanistan until 1985, when they discover that Dr. Manhattan is not there. So instead going in 1979 as in the real world, because they know that Dr. Manhattan will have crushed them very quick, as soon as they realize that Dr. Manhattan is not there, and they do that because obviously they have an intelligence service in the United States operating and so on, and spy networks, they decide to do that. So the world is on the verge of collapse once again. But going back to Dr. Manhattan and his idea of the meaningless of human beings and meaningless of the life of them, he seems to act as the consciousness of an existentialist, like Albert Camus, Simone de Beauvoir, or Jean-Paul Sartre, which are the three most famous existentialists of the 20th century. The three of them were French. But eventually he will understand that the chance to become a living is so small, is so infime, it's like a mixture of atoms, of water, the miracle of being born in a specific time and so on, that eventually he will believe that humans are worth to fight for. He realized that thanks to Silk Spectre, which is her girlfriend. She's a very interesting character in the TV show, much more than Night Owl, for example, but I just wanted to focus on three of them. But it's she who makes him realize that humans are really important, and it is good, it is important to still have a kind of intervention on Earth, because basically what Dr. Manhattan says is like, I don't want to support any side, so I just left. I want to remain neutral. But Silk Spectre explains to him that it is not a time to become ambivalent, because the world is very close to destroy itself. The doomsday clock is ticking, is almost to midnight. Literally, I think this happened in one of the last episodes when we see the clock covered by blood. So metaphorically and literally, it's like there is no time left to fight for save the world. Hence, in that moment, existentialism becomes anarchism, which is the idea that everybody is important and can help to achieve a better world. Finally, the third character that I wanted to talk after the comedian and Dr. Manhattan is Adrian Bate, also called Ozymandias, which is a homage to the poem of Percy Shelley called Ozymandias. Percy Shelley, as I mentioned in other episode, he was a vegetarian anarchist who died in the early 1820s, shortly after writing the unforgettable Mask of Anarchy, which pays homage to the people who were massacred in St. Peter's Square in Manchester in 1818. The so-called historical event known as Peterloo, because it happened 3 years after Waterloo, and it happened in the place of St. Peter, where the police basically killed many peaceful demonstrators in Manchester, and he created this poem in order to pay homage to them. Certainly, Adrian Bate represents the figure that wants to save the world and has the material means to do that. Whereas the comedian represents fascism and Dr. Manhattan do not have an ideology according to our categories, and he doesn't want to get involved anymore in any conflict. He was just following orders of the United States. Ozymandias personifies the anarco-communist utopia dreamt by people like Karl Marx and the socialist anarchists of the 19th century. As an anarchist, he believes in a society where the technology has solved the main threats. It's the idea of Marx, like when technology becomes so advanced, there will be a time that we won't need to work as before because the machine will make the work for us. And this is the approach that Adrian Bate takes. The main threats in Watchmen are the same, almost the same are in our world in 2023. The climate change, the refugee crisis, economic crisis, the world famine, the pandemics, and the menace of an atomic conflict. So yes, exactly the same threats as in our contemporary world. And this was written in 1985. And as being the richest and smartest human being, I am speaking about Ozymandias, about Adrian Bate, he has dedicated his life to create sources of green energy to diminish the effects of global warming. Food to feed the entire population, advanced medicine, and many organizations to help the most vulnerable across the world. He explained also his idea to travel fast without contaminating the environment. He gives a different speech. He has different kind of organizations which are trying to help the world in order to save itself. The main threat is climate change, but also the atomic menace. At the same time, unfortunately, he needs the support of the greatest superpowers to enhance those resources and help more numbers of people across the world, because paradoxically, even though he's implementing all these great measures to help humanity, the society in the United States is becoming corrupt. There are more crimes in New York and other cities and so on. Because he's just a person and he needs the power of all the states in the world. Nevertheless, the United States and the Soviet Union are persisting in the nuclear armament. And he laments how many millions of dollars are being wasted in making the war. This is precisely exacerbated in 1985 once the Soviet Union entered in Afghanistan. Dr. Manhattan has left and is living in Mars, and United States is willing to throw bomb into the Soviet Union. All of this is reflected in the condescending attitude of the comedian, who, during the last meeting of the Watchmen before the whole group broke up, he told him and the rest that he cannot save the world alone. From that moment on, Ozymandias is firmly convinced that he can save it. It's like a personal challenge also. And as the story develops, the readers will realize that he's willing to sacrifice everything to save humanity. Even though he's has the best intentions. He's this kind of the rare people who is morally trying to help everybody. At the same time, he has this narcissist approach, and for that reason, he loves Alexander the Great, the first person who tried to unite different civilizations like the Greeks and the Persians and so on. He did great things trying to establish different links between continents and so on. And at the same time, he was this figure that wanted to become the ruler. And Adrian Bate is kind of epitomized this idea of a person with the best of intention, with the economic means to change the world, with this narcissist style. So, as I mentioned, he's willing to sacrifice everything to save humanity. Breaking the doomsday clock, stopping it before midnight, the Minutemen and the Watchmen, ideals to protect, will be personified in an ugly monster coming from another dimension. We see the relation here between the time and space, between the doomsday clock and this big monster who appears suddenly from nowhere and jumps into New York and I think kills 3 million people or something like that. This happened in 1985, and as during 1945, in that year, in 1985, 40 years later, liberal democracy and communism, or whatever we can call the ideologies that the people back then was following, will join forces to stop fascism. This is a clear analogy between both eras. The unlikely alliance between liberal democracy, represented by the United States and the UK, and communism, represented by the Soviet Union in 1945, was referred by the historian Eric Hobsbawm as an unlikely alliance, which was needed to stop fascism. So, in Alan Moore's world, the leaders of the United States and the Soviet Union, which at that time are President Nixon, and in the Soviet Union, I am not sure in 1985 in the story was or Gorbachev or Brezhnev. I could say that it was Brezhnev, but not sure. Anyway, doesn't really matter, because Nixon and Brezhnev slash Gorbachev, they emulate Roosevelt and Stalin and Churchill in 1945, uniting different ideologies to defeat fascism in both years, in both 1945 1985, because as I mentioned, the monster that appears in 1985 in Watchmen is a metaphor of fascism, a kind of something which is that evil that is able to join people who otherwise are declared enemies. But and as happened in 1945, the narrative created in that year, in 1985, it will be a simplistic, a Manichaean one, saying like, oh, fascism is evil and the others are good, the Axis are evil, the Allied are good people. No matter that in 1945, the French who defeat the Nazis kill thousands of Algerians in Sétif in 1945, the day of the surrender of Hitler. Doesn't matter that Churchill provoked a famine that killed 3 million people in Bangladesh, in the area of Bangladesh that at the time was part of India. Doesn't matter that the United States throw atomic bombs in Japan, killing hundreds of thousands of people and destroying the life of many more and basically making Chul Island unhabitable. Doesn't matter that. The narrative is that ones are purely evil and others are purely good. And saying that, obviously, I'm not defending fascism, far from it. But I just wanted to say that at the same time that the Nazis and the fascists and all the Axis were the most purely evil that happened, the Allies were not good either. They were not as evil for sure, but still they commit crimes that kill like millions of people. That without mentioning Stalin and what he and his government did in the Soviet Union, killing million people, putting prisoners in the Gulag, destroying whole populations, killing the reminiscent of the Russian Revolution, making people like Trotsky and many others fly, and so on. But because they won the war, they won their the narrative. They have the relate in their favor. They have written the story. So, if in 1945 the evil was Hitler, was symbolizing Hitler, in 1985 will be Dr. Manhattan, which will become this person which is the cause of everything which is bad in the world. He's blamed for the sudden arrival of the monster. And because of that, as I mentioned earlier, the governments of the parts of the world, Soviet Union, the United States, they agreed to stop the Cold War, to finish the Cold War in order to fight against Dr. Manhattan, who happened to live after that because he came back to the Earth to try to save the Earth. And ironically, he saves the Earth by just the fact that people believe that he's the bad guy. So he becomes the savior of humanity in that sense, because he becomes the main point of enmity by the superpowers of the world. And there, the world is over. For the sake of history, Rorschach, a far-right misogynist character, which is strikingly has a morality which does not let him to stay silent about what happened, because he has realized he's the person who is investigating the murders of the Watchmen, of the comedian, and there are some other that are being killed later. He discovers that the murder is not other than Adrian Bate, Ozymandias. So he doesn't want to stay silent and let people believe that Dr. Manhattan is evil, whereas the murder of 3 million people has been caused by Adrian Bate, Ozymandias, who wanted to save the world, wanted to stop the war, is willing to sacrifice millions of lives and blame on Dr. Manhattan. So whereas Night Owl, Silk Spectre, and the others agree to stay silent, it is Rorschach, incredibly, that say, no, I will tell the truth. And his phrase is, quote, never compromise, end quote. Never compromise with a lie that sounds good. Even though the truth can be painful and hard to accept, and the lie may be more benevolent, it seems easier to, go with it, the truth must be exposed all the time. This is a homage that Alan Moore does to historical memory, to the silenced voices of those who were killed during dictatorship, during the wars in many countries, and those who die every day and do not have the support of the powerful to protect their legacy. And even though Rorschach is finally killed before he can tell the truth, a metaphor of the burning of the Library of Alexandria, Alexander the Great, remember, as a kind of parallelism with Adrian Bate, and this burning of the documents which have made us not know what was written there, which was a big loss for humanity. Also, the censorship of historians, or the simplistic narrative about events like the French Revolution, the World Wars, and other moments who are told in the way that the elites desire. But the story can be recovered, as Alan Moore explained in the last page. Even though Rorschach is dead and his voice is silenced, before dying, before going to the Arctic and face Adrian Bate to expose his plot, he was smart enough to send a diary to a newspaper, which, by the way, is a far-right newspaper which he reads every day. In the last page of Watchmen, Alan Moore challenged us to face the truth and dig into the historical events to tell the reality, what was happening. So in the last page, we see two journalists speaking in the kind of newsroom of the newspaper, and one of them say, "Oh, I have received this letter of a guy called Rorschach, which it says the diary of what happened." So in that diary, Rorschach has told everything that has happened, because before going to face death under the hands of Adrian Bate, Ozymandias, he wrote everything, because he knew, he has clues that Adrian Bate was the guilty one. So they do not open the diary in the last page, but they challenge us as readers to do that. So the idea is like, we as readers finish the graphic novel thinking like, will they open the diary? Will they risk the peaceful society in which we are living then, because there is no war anymore, as Dr. Manhattan was the main evil and now is living on Mars. Soviet Union and the United States has made peace. So henceforth, because they need to be aware about the menace from the outer world, from outer Earth, from Mars. If Adrian Bate is exposed as the main guilty person, what will happen? He will face justice, but at the same time, Adrian Bate is trying to save humanity, trying to avoid climate change, creating food for everybody in the world. Can we really put on trial to the most benevolent person on Earth? So those are questions that Alan Moore asks us at the end of the graphic novel. So from the first page until the end, we see this kind of symmetry in which Ozymandias covered the whole story, and one of the ideas of the story is that the history must be investigated all the time, and we will still find new keys to understand our past, to comprehend better the present, and help us to develop our ideas to the future. And just to finish this series about Watchmen and Alan Moore, I don't think I will speak about Promethea, maybe in the future, but I will say that I encourage you to watch also the miniseries about Watchmen, because in that one, it happened in 2019, 34 years after Watchmen, and we will see what had happened to Adrian Bate. Ozymandias, has he been trial, but by why he did back then? Let's see what will happen. I have watched 2 times. The miniseries is absolutely amazing, with a performance of Regina King which is out of this world. She's absolutely incredible. I think she won the Golden Globe for Best Actress. TV show. The miniseries won the Golden Globe for the Best Miniseries. But that is an important part of Watchmen. But again, I encourage you to read the novel because it's absolutely incredible. And just to say thanks for listening to this episode. If you have any questions, any suggestions, please write in the section of comments. Put a like and just share these channels if you like it. Thanks so much for listening about the life of Alan Moore, V for Vendetta, and Watchmen.